So welcome everyone to the first of two of our seminars in 2024 from the Restorative Lab as part of our Fellows and Associates community. Each year at the lab, we welcome and welcome new fellows and associates to be part of the community of learning at the Restorative Research, Innovation, and Education Lab here at Dalhousie University. And we're really privileged to host this community of learners and practitioners and researchers at the lab, which is located here in Nova Scotia, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, otherwise known as Mi'kma'ki. And of course, that has special resonance and real significance for the wisdom that we benefited from with our partners at Mi'kmaq Legal Support Network and other justice leaders from the Mi'kmaq community. So it is my distinct pleasure tonight, and so happy that all of you have come to join us sort of live, insofar as anything feels live anymore, but from our extended community of people connected to the restorative justice movement and to the lab, and as a way of us all coming together to bear witness and be part of the conversation that is then recorded and prepared as a resource that's been really important to those here in Nova Scotia and amongst the broader restorative community as they try to advance the work. And so we've had a really successful engagement of folks, both in terms of coming to be part of the live presentation and then benefiting and using the seminar presentations in their own work and with their own communities. So really grateful that you're all here and really grateful for the opportunity to have this sharing tonight. So it's my pleasure to introduce Erika Sasson, who is an incredible leader in the restorative justice field. She's visionary and an innovator. She is the recipient of this year's David Prize for incredible New Yorkers, like just a small pool of people from whom to choose, and recognized for her work to really be able to dig in and think about other justice pathways and solutions in some of the hardest and most unlikely, for some, of circumstances. Otherwise, Erika is known to many for her willingness to walk alongside those who are trying to vision and find justice for themselves and for communities. She works in connection with the criminal legal system in response to hard cases and for the system to imagine dealing with otherwise, and helps both the system and those affected imagine and find justice, and also together with organizations as they start to think about what does it mean for them to be restorative and also to be working in pursuit of justice. Importantly, she's a Canadian, importantly for us, who is currently in New York, but maybe this is part of our scheme to lure her back. And so it's our great pleasure to have the opportunity tonight to be with her, to listen to her, to learn from her, and to engage with her as she talks to us about the long road to system transformation. And so, Erika, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Jennifer. Thanks to everyone at the lab for welcoming me this year, and then for inviting me to do this seminar. Thanks especially to Jacob Glover, who really helped me think through my ideas of what I wanted to share with you today. So thanks. And let's get into it. If you're here, if you want to turn on your camera, I'm not even sure what I can see, but I see some great friends on this, and I'm very happy to see you all. So feel free to get on camera or not, and feel free to throw into the chat where you're calling in from if you want to. I was saying it before we started, I'm an in-person kind of person. So the more I can feel you, the better I will feel. But here we are. on the Zoom, and we thank the Zoom technology for bringing me to Canada, which is wonderful. But today, I'm here to talk about this long road to system transformation, what I think is possible, what are the limitations, what I'm working on, what I find challenging, and what has been giving me hope. And I hope to share just a little bit of that with you. I'm very, very open to questions, so please bring them on when the time is right. I'll talk for about 25 minutes and then we'll turn it over to questions. Okay. So, where am I right now? I'm not in Canada. I am in New York City. Thank you, Jen, for the land acknowledgement of where you are. I'm on the unceded land of the Lenape people. And I'm also in New York City where things work a certain kind of way. And I know we're all over the country, and I kind of wanted to share a little bit of what New York City, how it works from the justice system perspective, and just to orient us into what it means to work even connected to the justice system. So this is New York City today. These are our 5 boroughs. Each borough has its own elected district attorney. That means that if you want to do anything in any borough, you can't, do it because you did it in Brooklyn. You can't do it in Manhattan. You've got to work with each and every borough on what you're doing. I'm calling in from Brooklyn, but I did also want to show you all, if you can see my cursor. Can you see my cursor? This little island here is Rikers Island. It's the notorious jail complex. So even though each borough is different, they all send their the people who are accused of crime, so the pre-trial detainees, so people who've been charged with an offense but who have not yet been and have been remanded, so have not been let out on any kind of bail or any kind of supervision. Everyone goes to Rikers Island. It's right over here. It's right by the airport. It's kind of some kind of psychological torture to watch the airplanes going overhead as you sit on an island that no one can reach. It's very difficult to get there. And it is also for people who are incarcerated for a period of a year or less. So this is our, just the beginning of our justice system and the where I am. And I wanted to kind of start there. Start also with a sense of possibility. I think, sometimes I think about what we've been doing in New York City, and I think, it's kind of amazing. Maybe 10 years ago, I was in Brooklyn and I was starting something called the Red Hook Peacemaking Program, which was happening right here in the corner of Brooklyn in a little neighborhood called Red Hook. And we wanted to learn from the Navajo Nation peacemaking practice and bring some of those lessons into that courthouse and resolve cases that would otherwise go through court. We wanted to resolve them using an inspiration, a version of Native peacemaking that was taught to us by our Navajo Nation teachers. And that felt really exciting. And we went to the Brooklyn DA's office and we said, is there any way, kind of like in an Oliver Twist kind of way, can we have just a couple of cases off your docket? We have 15 or 20 cases of the kinds of cases that you'll never think about again. Maybe think about neighbors who are fighting, who are driving people crazy, family members who are fighting, and just give us those cases and you can continue to do your work the way you do it for the vast majority of cases. In a way, that's how we went to them. And they said, okay, fine, we'll give you this little handful. Cut to 10 years later, and suddenly, all of the boroughs are open to talking about really serious cases. 10 years after that, I'm in Manhattan and I'm working on my 4th homicide. These are the highest level charges, murder and manslaughter. And I'm, in the executive level of that branch being like, okay, let's work on the most difficult cases. And part of me feels like this is an incredible bit of progress and we shouldn't skip over the wins. This is amazing. We went from begging to being requested, that people are starting to see that there's another way to do things. People are starting to feel like even in very difficult cases, they don't have the answers and they're looking to others for the answers. This is a big win. But when I was indeed working on that most recent murder case, I went to meet with the defendant. And he was brought in from Rikers Island into the Manhattan District Attorney's office. And he comes in and he's detained, they're uncuffing him. And I'm standing there holding, a platter of lasagna that I've made for him because I figure we just got to talk, and he's been detained, and I want to make this as homey as possible as we talk about what his options are and whether he wants to work with me on thinking about what had happened. And I'm a little nervous, and by little nervous, I'm extremely nervous because I've read his pre-sentence report, and they've written all kinds of things about him, and he never opens up, he never talks to anyone. So I'm really just like standing there with my lasagna, hoping that we have some kind of connection. And as they're, taking off his handcuffs, which is a whole other argument that I have to have with officers about making sure that they do that. As they're doing that, it gives me this big smile and says, "I have so many questions for you." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So we sit down and we start talking. And one of the first questions that he has for me is like, "Why me? Everyone I'm detained with, everyone in my house at Rikers Island, all of them are charged with murder and manslaughter. Why am I the one getting restorative justice?" And it was really difficult because I thought, there is no good reason for this. There is no reason why you have this opportunity and other people don't. It is a sign that we are nowhere near hitting what I think would be a kind of critical mass of really making change. So we've made a lot of progress. I'm here to say we've made a lot of progress. It's really exciting. There's exciting roads ahead. And we have to really take stock at what's not changing in our city and what kind of hasn't worked in any meaningful way. And I'm going to talk about both of those things. So bear with me. So this is what I want to work on with you all today. Share a little bit more about who I am and why I do this work. I want to share some of the lessons that I've learned the hard way from working with legal systems. And some protections I think people can take if they are going to do this work. It's very precarious. It's very difficult, but there are things that you can do to make the work better. I want to talk a little bit about what I think good restorative justice practice is, and I want to share what I think this means for system transformation. So this is my little plan, and here we go. A little bit more about me. Jen shared the most important thing, which is that I am Canadian. I grew up in Montreal, and I moved to Toronto after I became a lawyer. And my first job out of law school was being a federal prosecutor on behalf of the Public Prosecution Service of Canada. It was a very difficult job for me. I cried all the time. I felt very awkward talking to judges, but talking about people who had no voice in the room. All of the learnings that I had were about decision making and how decisions are made, and what are the incentives with the police, and what are the incentives with the prosecutors, and what does it mean to face a judge, and what happens if that judge is very difficult, and what do you do, and how do you duck and cover, and how do you negotiate, and how do you deal with the sexism, and how do you deal with the racism. It was a lot of that. It was not about the people who were most impacted with all of those decisions that were being made. I didn't get hardly any insight into what motivates people, both in how they are, and how they are affected by the system and what happened before they got there. I got zero insight into that. I got insight into how to function in a courtroom. So very, shortly after that, I left and I became, and I moved to the United States to think about this experience and try to process it and try to do something with it. And really shortly thereafter, I encountered Native peacemaking, and it was an incredible opportunity for me. I traveled to many different jurisdictions, different tribal lands and reservations, and met with elders, and a lot of the times just sat and listened and undid a lot of my legal training. I remember being in Alaska a couple of times and just watching people speak in Yupik and watching how they didn't interrupt one another. And I didn't understand the words, but I understood the meaning of how they listened. And so I started to think about what that meant for me personally. And why I do this work, I felt very constrained in the legal system. I felt like I wasn't learning anything. So certainly that's one of the reasons, but I also do this work because I think that secrets are toxic, that I think that we do get unstuck, and when we do unburden ourselves, and I get joy from helping people do that. And that's really the fundamental reason why I'm here. So I want to talk a little bit about the legal process, but I want to also situate us in this world of restorative justice, this movement that Jen alluded to. this movement, that this access that we have right now in the system is a function of this giant ecosystem here in New York City of advocates and organizers and elders and community organizations that are doing restorative justice all over the place in community, and are also yelling and screaming and explaining and leading and showing the way of why the current way of doing things isn't giving people what they want. And so there's this incredible ecosystem that we are a part of, and each person is doing something in their own way. And I believe that we are strengthening one another to try to shift things. Now, so you can be doing the work here in community all over the place. You can be doing the work in community. If you're doing the work with the system, the framework that I have found helps me understand my work is really one of harm reduction. If you, for those of you who are not kind of really familiar with the criminal punishment system, what happens is there's an incident of harm that flows into a formal investigation. If that formal investigation leads to an arrest, and then a series of court hearings, then a sentence, and then re-entry, if that's what happens, if there is a sentence that is carceral. At any point, right after the incident, you can do something different. Right after the investigation, you can do something different. We have found in New York City that we can do things post-investigation, pre-arrest. So anything that basically holds the system at bay and says, just stop doing what you're doing, because if you do any more, it's going to cause all of these collateral consequences. We can do something different. So there are people working in New York City on vehicular manslaughter and what to do after a horrific car crash. They're doing restorative justice in those places. I've been recently trying to pilot sexual violence in the post-investigation, pre-arrest space. There's many people doing work as alternatives to incarceration. So in the post-arrest, pre-court space. Very rarely, but importantly, I've been trying to do some work in the sentence mitigation space. So here between the court hearing and the sentence, cracking that open and trying to reduce sentences by having a parallel restorative justice process. Now I'm going to talk, I will define how I see restorative justice a little bit down the road. So for the practitioners on the call, I promise I will get there. But for right now, I wanted you to see the kind of ecosystem of opportunities that are available. And also just remember that it's not all happening in relationship to the court. A lot of the strength of the movement is happening within communities. And then the courts are like, oh, I've heard of this other thing that sounds like it might be better. And then they call you in. But it's like that there's some give and take here that is happening, and different ways that people are making opportunities happen for one another. Now, if you are working with systems, I know there are people here on this call who would not work with systems, and I understand why, because they are very coercive and it is very difficult to do good work with the weight of the system hanging over you. But there are also opportunities to do something beautiful, and when you are doing them in that way, then there are certain things that you can do to make your process and your work stronger. I like to define it as creating firewalls with legal systems. So you really have to do, I'm trying to explain this in a way that makes sense, but there are ways to build really strong firewalls. And first of all is to explain to a prosecutor, if you're going to work with a prosecutor or a judge or a defense or anyone, you have to understand how and why they make decisions, and so that you can influence their decisions. What I found with prosecutors is a lot of the times they have decision-making fatigue. They make too many decisions about too many people too much of the time. And so some of the times what they're trying to do is not have to decide on a certain case. They don't want to say, is there enough evidence? If there isn't enough evidence, the only opportunity they have is to dismiss the case. And that feels like it's a very 0 and 1. It's frustrating. And so what they'll do is say, well, I don't want to make a decision here. Can I give this case to an alternative to incarceration? And that leads to net widening. And you really want to avoid that. So if you're going to have a strong referral system that doesn't lead to net widening, you have to be really alive to that question and find a way to explain that to those folks, saying, hey, listen, I know you don't want to, I know you don't know what to do, but your job is to either prosecute or not prosecute. So I will only take a very strong, provable, factual case so that I know that if it's coming to me, I am not part of net widening. And so I ask questions about the evidence, and I ask questions about, okay, well, show me your case. Basically, show me your hand. And after you show me your hand, we can talk about whether this is right or not for restorative justice. And we have to have a process for that as well. So you have to know how to say that. And also how to say no effectively. And in your referrals, be really mindful of the racialized way people use alternatives to incarceration. The bottom line is that it's difficult to say this out loud, certainly on a recording, but most of the time, if left unchecked, it is people with privilege and people with power and people with racial power who are going to get the benefit of the alternatives. So the other difficult conversation that I've had with referring agencies is, you've sent me people who had a certain kind of power. Now you have to send me people who have no power, who are part of marginalized communities, who are part of, you have to talk about that issue and just make it part of your communication with them. I will take good cases, and I'm not going to not take a case of somebody with power or with privilege if it's really and truly a right case for restorative justice. But if that's the only case you're sending, I can't work with you. And so that is a difficult conversation to have, but a very, very important one, or you will be contributing to this very real reality that most of the time white people are getting the benefit of any kind of alternative. And so that's just another conversation that you have to have about how and why they send your referrals. I also want to just shed some light on consent and the type of consent conversations that you need to have with people who come from the system. Many people, if anyone in authority tells them that they should do anything, they think they have to, for many good reasons. And so after I get a referral, I have to have a conversation that is essentially off the record. And I'll talk about the confidentiality practices that I use to protect that, to create an off the record conversation. But I have to have a very meaningful, very robust conversation around consent. That doesn't mean I say, do you consent to this? It means I sit and just probably say nothing for a very long period of time. I really did want to get into the practice of what does this actually look like to have that conversation. It's really just listening. Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's an hour and a half, to understand if the person in front of me needs what I have on offer. If they are starting to say, well, I'm actually really afraid of the other person and I really never want to sit in a room with them, or I never actually did this thing that I'm being accused of, I have to listen to what is happening so that I can say, do you want this? Because you don't have to have this. I know someone maybe suggested to you, maybe a family member suggested it to you, maybe an authority suggested it to you. You don't have to do this. And that's a very ongoing conversation that I have with people. Now, when you're having these conversations, they have to be protected from a legal authority. So this is another thing. The best thing that you can do is have legislation that protects what is said within a restorative justice conversation. We don't have that here in New York City. So that means that any practitioner needs to have a relationship with the prosecuting authority, telling them that says that anything said to the restorative justice facilitator cannot be used to further prosecute the case. That's not sufficient. I can't be subpoenable. My notes can't be subpoenaed. And then even more, what I request is if I say no to a case, or if a case falls apart for whatever reason, that I don't give reasons why we're not moving forward. Because what I'm really concerned about with any kind of person in authority is that they will make inferences about why something moves forward or why it doesn't, about who's worthy and who's not, about who's remorseful and who's not. And I really don't want them making any of those judgments. So I make it very clear that if I have to reject a case, there will be no reasons and no inferences made. And I give them a lot of reasons why I would reject a case so that they can't make an inference. It could be this, it could be that, it could be the other. But I'm really wary of that kind of inference being made. So I've created, as much as I can, confidentiality. I've worked really, really hard on consent. And this is how I'm starting to build the blocks of the firewall. I've made my referral process clear. I've talked about discrimination in referrals, and this is how I start to build my wall between me and the legal system. But then the other important piece is to know your lane. And like you can't be in my business and I'm not going to be in your business. Now I make certain requests of any authority that there be a reduction, a meaningful reduction in whatever the charge is or whatever the legal impact would be on this person. I think anybody working anywhere alongside a system, people need incentives to get the system to reduce its impact on them. Here in the United States, we have very significant collateral consequences to any arrest, to any charge, to any prosecution, and our conditions of confinement are abominable. So to the extent that I can reduce all of that, I think that is really important. Now, we know that that has something to do with consent and participation in a process, and that's a really complicated conversation, and I can kind of get to that in the Q&A. But my practice has been to request that reduction. I want the system to do less harm as part of me participating in any kind of restorative justice process. Now, this is, there are a lot of people on the call. I'd love to hear what they have to say about this, but I think a lot of times I hear people saying, this isn't restorative justice and that's not restorative justice. And I do ask myself if I even know what restorative justice is anymore, because we all have really different kind of assumptions. And so I'm going to make no assumptions about what you might think it is or what I might think it is. But I want to share a little bit about what it is maybe to me. And then I want to lay out the steps that I take, really basic steps, so that you can kind of follow along and what happens for me with people. I think, as Jennifer has said, many, many times, this is a relational approach to justice. I concur with that. But what does the space look like when you're really doing the work? What does that practice look like? And I tend to think, I was looking for an image for this and I failed, but it's both very wide and very narrow. I think about it as wide and narrow. I think about it as creating a space that is anchored in values and focused on the importance of human relationships. And it's a space that's wide enough to acknowledge and maybe even address systemic harm, but yet it's focused enough to face interpersonal harm. I think it has to be also practical. We have to kind of get to the way we have interacted as humans in really practical ways. I think it is certainly a space for grief and for loss, and a space wide enough to hold that and to hold the myriad of emotional and spiritual aspects of human existence. But it's also narrow enough to heal one piece of the puzzle. That's what I'm looking for in a practical front with people, is to get unstuck on something. This harm has happened. It has either come out of a relationship or it has created a relationship between people. And they're holding that. They're holding this tape of what happened to them. And the tape is running and running and running and running and running and running. And what they did. And if they did it, it's also running in certain ways. And there's denials, and there's ways that you hide the truth from yourself, and there are ways that you don't want to face things, and then you talk about it in your head over and over and over. And in this space, my intention for people is to be able to have them let out that tape, let it out. First, let it out with me. Tell me 25 times how it happened. Just keep telling me. And then when you're ready, and I've listened enough to know what that kind of sign is that you're ready, we're going to start asking some probing questions to see where you want to go with this. And that when we come together, we're not going to get through everything. We're not going to heal everything, but we're going to get unstuck on something in a meaningful way. That's what I hope. I never promise, but that's my hope. And that's been my experience of what happens for the most part. These are generally the 5 steps that I follow. Not everyone does very in-depth preparation, but I work, as Jen said, on very serious, well, this could be for very serious crimes too. Some people don't do a lot of preparation, but for me, in gender-based violence and in homicides, I want to do a lot of preparation. I want to bring the stakes. The stakes are very high. I want to create a really contained space where we can do that one thing. We can't attend to everything. And we cannot change the past. And everyone's going to have to live with whatever happened forever. And so it's a really realistic shift in what we're doing. The other thing that is really important for me is storytelling and bringing in supporters and people's micro community, and sometimes even bringing in supporters from the macro community. So it's not just a dyad or 2 people, living through some episode of something that happened, we open that up, bring other people in so they can breathe some oxygen into the room, so they can share some stories of things that they've worked through. And together we will get kind of through this. I always work with co-facilitators. I often work with co-facilitators who have really different backgrounds than me, different race, different gender, different experience, just something else. And the purpose isn't to create this rainbow of representation. The purpose is just to, again, it's oxygen. It's just like difference. Let's just be around difference. I find the thing around a good restorative justice process is that we can be different together. And that's what I want to do, whether it's a very difficult conversation around, not around a harm specifically, but bringing people together around a different conversation is, can we be different together? So I love having different people in the room so that we can kind of come together, and that is part of the healing process. So I follow these 5 steps. At the end of step 4, the step 1 and step 2 is all of that legal processing. If this is happening in community, there's going to have to be some pieces of step 1 and step 2 that happen also, because the systems are everywhere and they're going to impact people anyway. So thinking about legal jeopardy is also important if you're working in community. And so it's not so much of a binary that this is only for how you think if you're working with an active system harm. It's just that you have to be more alert to it. But even if you're working deeply in community, the legal systems can be called, authorities can be called, people can tape things. You have to think about how you're protecting people for consent and confidentiality. But then you move through preparation, that long, arduous process. A lot of the times if people come from the legal system, I have to have a really terrible conversation sometimes with people. Do you know you did this thing? I remember this terrible conversation. Somebody had punched an older man. He fell on the ground and he died. And he knew that he did this. The man who did it knew that he punched him, but he was like, well, I don't know. He kind of went back and forth with the impact of his actions. And I had to say, no, at the right time, when we had the right amount of trust, I had to say, do you know that when you punched him, he died? And his lawyer never said it to him. His close supporters never said that to him. It kind of landed on me in the preparation stage to bring what I thought was an obvious fact and why we're all together. But the way the human psychology works, you can think that everybody knows what's going on, and then they kind of turn away. And so it's the difficult role of the facilitator who says, no, we have to come back. I kind of can't let you, float away from this conversation in this moment. That's what happens in preparation, because I can't bring people together if they don't know or are hiding from the impact of their actions. And so those are some of the difficult conversations. With another homicide that I did, it took months and it took so many hours and hours of really connecting until I said, the real truth of the matter, which is somebody's husband was killed. And once we built enough trust, I was able to say, if it was me and it was my husband, I don't know how I'd be functioning right now. Are you ready to talk about this? And he was ready to talk about it. And it was that moment where it was like, okay, it's just you and me right now. Do you want to talk about the impact of this? And once we can get there, then we can do more and more together. So then we bring people together, and then eventually we do follow up. Sometimes you have to do more than one meeting, but for the most part, because I work on these kinds of cases that are so high stakes for people, one meeting is about all they can handle. I've had multiple cases where the person harmed walks in and immediately gets up and walks out, or cannot even get in the door. And then, that just being there was hard enough. And that's what it looks like. But when it goes well, this is what I think can come from it. This woman said this to me after I did work with her on her a sexual assault case. She said in her follow-up, I feel like myself again, but stronger and bigger. And this is truly what I want for survivors of sexual assault, to feel like themselves again, but stronger and bigger. And that gave me a lot of hope that we can do good things, even as we work through difficult moments. So what is system transformation in all of this? We're halfway there. We're 2 steps back. We're doing, we're in all kinds of spaces around this. But as I was thinking about what do I think about harm reduction and what do I think about system transformation. I was thinking a lot about my acting coach from when I was in law school. This is Jacqueline McClintock. She died 10 years ago of lung cancer, and she was extremely beloved by the acting community in Canada. And I was in her classes, going to law school during the day and doing acting at night. And she was incredibly irreverent, incredibly funny, and would say the most outrageous thing, but she also is the only person who, throughout that period that I was in law school, taught me how to listen and taught me how to really hear what is happening in the room. And so I really credit her with that. And I remember this moment where I said to her, Jacqueline, I'm in law school, like, am I going to be a lawyer or an actor? And she said, a lawyer. I was like, oh, okay, fine, I'll be a lawyer. And I was like, well, why? She's like, well, because you can do something else. If you can do anything else, that's what you should do. You can only be an actor if that's the only thing that you can do. And clearly you can do something else, so go do it. And this is my message for the system, for prosecutors, for judges, for anyone who's going to do anything else. If there's anything else you can do after a harm has happened other than prosecute it, that's what we should be doing. The vision I have for system transformation is really about reducing the system to its right size, which is, in my opinion, tiny. This little tiny place where people who have absolutely no remorse, who've been given lots of chances, who have all the resources in the world, and who still will not face the impact of their harm, those are people who are going to need to be prosecuted. A couple of weeks ago, we just prosecuted someone like that in New York City. The whole city is very, very proud of how we held an unremorseful, highly resourced former president accountable. That was the proper use of our system. Now, for the most part, we prosecute people who are poorly resourced and very remorseful, and that is a huge, huge waste. It is a terrible wasted opportunity. And I think that if we can reverse that, then I think we could be in a good place. So first of all, system transformation, just do it less. Do everything you're doing so much less and do anything else. But there's this other piece, which is about doing it differently. And that's the part where I think being in relationship with systems players, I'm certainly humble enough to know that, half the time I worry that I'm enabling them to feel good about their work and give, again, little crumbs of restorative justice or little crumbs of therapeutic work. That's sometimes how it feels like. The system just goes on as it does. It grows and grows and grows, and it never gets right-sized, but we should feel good about the little crumbs. And so I am mindful of that and of that enabling feature of this work. But my hope and my North Star is to also be part of transformation, where when I say to people who are in the system, I'm on everybody's side. I want everybody in the room, both the person who was harmed and the person who caused harm, to be well after this intervention. That to me is, what I'm trying to share with them. It's what I didn't get when I was working in the system. I didn't get a chance to be on everyone's side, or I did get a chance to do that, and it was like I was wearing just the wrong clothes. So I think that if we can bring in an ethic of care, if we can bring in an ethic of accountability and responsibility into how our systems behave, into having our court system take responsibility for the conditions of confinement that people find themselves in, instead of pulling their hands back and saying, that's not my fault, that's corrections, I've got nothing to do with this. Like, that level of deflecting and minimizing and denying responsibility between our systems actors, that's what we see in our culture everywhere. And if there could be a culture of taking responsibility for system actors, where they said, no, I actually have to go visit the jail. There are places where people who are in positions of authority go to visit the jail. They feel responsible for what's happening there. They feel responsible for the conditions of confinement. I think we can do that. I think that we can build that kind of ethic where we are responsible for one another, where any system player feels that they are on truly everyone's side because you want people to be well, and you don't think that people come to this because of there are these individuals who had all the choices in the world and that's why they showed up in front of you. Like, we need a better ethic about how we do this kind of work. At the end of one of my cases last year, it was really tremendous. It was a homicide case. Most of the time, if you're in a courtroom when a homicide case is being sentenced, it can be very tense. People, fights can break out. People can get very aggressive because most people have been pitted against each other. And after I had finished a restorative justice process for 2 families, and one of the most important players in that process was the mother of the person who had caused the death. She had been wanting to, do some kind of outreach to the victim and the victim's family for the years that this was enmeshed in the legal system. 4 years this case was enmeshed in the legal system. And for all that time, all she wanted was to say how sorry she was on behalf of her son. The son as well said, was able to face the harm that he did. But I think about like these other people who were not even considered in our system and how hard it was for this mother to go through this process. And we all arrive at the sentencing, and I'm standing with the husband of the deceased, and I'm, just kind of staying with him. He was really nervous. And so I'm kind of right by his side. And we had already met in a circle a couple of weeks prior. And the mother comes bouncing up over to me, gives me a bear hug, and then they give a bear hug. And then the prosecutor comes and finds us all talking. And so the prosecutor talks to the mother of the defendant, and she is like overjoyed that she had this opportunity to do a restorative justice process. Then the defense lawyer comes, and he starts talking to the victim's husband about his experience in restorative, and we're just kind of all out there. And I am like, I don't even know how to describe. I'm like, what's happening? Like, how is this happening? But it felt like mingling that you would have, like you wouldn't know who was on which side or what. And then we walk in to the hearing, and we, the defendant's family sits down, and I ask the victim's husband where he wants to sit. And he's like, let's just go sit with them. And so we go, so I sit in between the defendant's mother and the victim's husband. And that's how we watch the sentencing happen. And, I'm both so hopeful. It was the most exquisite experience for me to be part of that. And I watched, and the judge, she didn't really take it in. She just kind of, it was like this miracle was happening in her courtroom. And, that it's like, I felt like they didn't notice. And it was really, so my hope remains that we can continue to do this differently, and that they will notice and things will change, and maybe we can all do things a little differently. But as I said, this is a long, long road. So thank you so much for listening, and please bring on your questions. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
I think Jacob is going to facilitate our time of discussion and questions. And what I would invite is for us to be able to do that as sort of a community of people who've gathered tonight to be able to talk with Erika and reflect with one another, because we don't get many times to do that all together. And so in terms of sharing my hopes for the difference it makes when we have a chance to be inspired by one another, to be supported by one another, and to give lift each other up and give each other a nudge, this feels like one of those times. So maybe that would be best facilitated, and I'll leave it to Jacob to sort of call on people as he sees your hands, either real or virtual. But if you go up to your view button and haven't done so already, you can probably open the gallery. And if you're with us in a place or space, we know the time zones are very different if people are sneaking time away to listen and to be present. But as you're able, it'd be lovely to see your faces and to be able to be part of this conversation together. And there I've stalled long enough for you to all think about the thing you want to say most and filter all the other 30 things that you want to say. And I'll leave it to Jacob just to kind of invite us to be participating together in conversation with Erika. And because I don't get to thank you at the end, I'll say it was exactly what I expected in terms of the challenge and the care with which that challenge is issued, and so grateful for all of the thoughts that are swirling. So turn it over to you, Jacob, to invite people, and I'll hold my 63 questions unless others don't get their hands up in time.
Thanks, Jen. Thank you, Erica. Wonderful presentation. Yeah, I want to just open the floor, get things started. Does anybody, if you feel free to also message me in the chat if you are, if you can't say it out loud, or you want to, maybe you're a little shy, I can anonymize questions for Erica that way. Otherwise, just feel free to raise your hand. Yeah, Lisa, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Lisa McDougall. I'm the executive director of one of our local RJ agencies. And it's not a specific question. I just want to say thank you. Amazing work and amazing stories. And I think it really shows that humanity, your last little bit about sitting between the two parties who would normally be divided in court. Those things do happen in more restorative processes. And I was struck by when you talked about taking the crumbs and doing things well. And I don't know if you found, we all have different personalities, all of us. And I recently butted heads with a Crown over a relatively small amount of restitution, which he wanted to set a precondition for. And just the other day, he sent me a file that would blow your mind, that he's forward focused in one way, but not another way. So I guess what I heard in that too was take the crumbs and do them well, but also different people see different uses, and he's stretched himself in one way, but he's so held back in another. So I think we have to take those opportunities and run with them, and you certainly have.
Thank you. I mean, I'm not sure if there's more to say. That I think you're right. It's everyone's relationship to, what that feels like. Sometimes I feel like it's, sometimes I have this kind of daunting feeling like, oh, we're just taking crumbs and we're continuing the same dynamic and the same power dynamic with how things should be. And then you think about the racialized implications of all of that. And it can really get you down. And other times you think, no, we're really making a shift. And they need this, and they're starting to know that they need this. And I may not, I have a very close friend who says, Kelsey Sayers, she's brilliant, restorative justice practitioner and attorney here in New York. And she says, we're doing this work for the families we haven't met yet. You're not doing this work to know this in your own lifetime that you're gonna, see some big change. You're doing this for generations down the road. And that has given me a lot more, ease as I move through this work when I think about her words. And at the same time, I think you can, do both with the Crown that you're talking with. You can say, maybe yes here, but the bigger picture is this, and always try to have both the micro conversation and the macro conversation, and never let go of that macro conversation. So, I had a case where it was, especially when people use discretion, and you have to think about how they're going to use discretion for the people who they deem worthy. That's a really important moment to have that macro conversation around what are the socioeconomic and racialized conditions that make certain people seem worthy and certain people seem disposable, and we have to push back on that conversation. And so that, there's just like, it's always like picking your battles, finding the decision makers that can hear you, doing what you can, I guess.
Go ahead, Sue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I came in late, so if you already explained this, I apologize for asking again. And I think what you say about who is worthy, that so has a gendered lens and a racial lens. And, women will often, sorry for my phone ringing, women will often talk about, who have been victimized, will talk about how you have to be the perfect victim in order to get what you need in the system. But that has nothing to do with my question, which is, how did you gain entry to the courts and the people that you work with regularly, and who hires you to do this work?
That's such a great question. So the fact that I was a Crown, for those of you in Canada, for like 20 seconds of my career, you know, that has given me entry into all kinds of legal systems. Sometimes they'll be like, you know, Erika really understands us. And it's really shocking because I've been doing the restorative justice work for 15 years and I did that for about 2 years. But it's incredible the kind of thinking, the access that it has given me all this time, and continues to here and there. And so the access comes from being partially from being a lawyer and from having those credentials, and for now having a relationships here in New York City for a long time with other lawyers. In terms of payment, for a long time, I worked at an organization called the Center for Justice Innovation, and I developed a lot of programming and a lot of thinking and a lot of alternatives as an employee there. So they paid me. But for the last few years, I've been on my own. And there was one case, it was, you know, where I did get paid by a prosecutor's office. And that was like my first and last case of that kind, because it's already so much, you know, even in that case, I had to tell the prosecutor, listen, the victim, in that case, the victim was not strong enough to sit in a circle. It was clear to me that they didn't actually want this. And I had to tell somebody who was paying me and who had all of the power and all of the authority, no. And then I had to hope and pray that they still honored the deal that they had offered to the defendant. And so it all worked out, and I said no, and I flexed back and I explained my reasons and I protected this victim, and I was able to ensure a good outcome for the defendant. But I didn't, when I say I did not sleep, I thought I was gonna like shrivel, like really shrivel up. That was very, very difficult. And so after that, I was like, there is absolutely no way, this is hard enough, essentially. There is no way I can add like how I pay the rent in New York City type of thinking into that negotiation. So after that, I started raising some private money for some completely independently so that neither side had to pay me. And that's been, I do very few cases because of those types, because first of all, I have to have independent money to do it. And also they're very hard, and I'm trying to show, an inch wide and a mile deep, how far we can go. That's what I'm really, really looking at when I take a very difficult case, is I want to go an inch wide and a mile deep. So again, I'm not, I don't do 1,000 cases. I won't be able to, but I'm really interested in how we grow this work so that it does reach that point. And I think who pays you is really, really important.
Margarita, go ahead, and then there's a question from Gail in the chat that I'll read out once you've asked your question.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much for that talk, Erika. And I think this kind of aligns with what you're talking about, like growing this work. During your presentation, like the piece that you were talking about, like the strength of community really resonated. And I think especially when you were talking about how restorative approaches, like how we're defining it or how we understand it. My question is more, when you're thinking of like even growing this work, or we're thinking of working with groups, organizations, and I'm thinking specifically here selfishly for the work that I'm doing, but like with the anti-violence sector or the GBV sector, and there might be hesitation about restorative approaches. Do you have any kind of framings or some tips there in terms of how to kind of grow this work and to speak to it, especially for those people who are hesitant or thinking about the survivors in those cases as well?
Yeah, that's such a good question. My mode, and it's not the most radical and it's not, the most aggressive, has been to try to work with people and understand what their reluctance is. So I have worked with, I do work with prosecutors. I will work with judges. I'm working with people to understand, what it takes, which is different than saying like, having hard lines and saying, I won't work with this person or that person. And I think the same framework in the gender-based violence movement has been important to me in how I move in that movement. My mom ran a shelter for 20 years. And so my first, the only domestic violence shelter in Montreal that had kosher kitchen for all of the Orthodox women who wanted to flee and couldn't. And so that was my intro into the gender-based violence movement, was just kind of watching her work from afar and then telling her about my work and kind of trying to understand, like, do you think that these could coexist? Like, is there anything that could they come together? And she was like, yes, we need so many more things for women. Yes. So she kind of gave me my first permission to really at least inquire down this road. And then I spent a very long time listening to domestic violence advocates, trying to understand their frustration, their nerves, right? Like what's going on there. And, you know, expressing to them that I accept and I respect this wisdom, and I have something possibly to offer. So trying not to put this in the binary. I think for me, it's been about, you know, what are the options for women, and really, again, laying clear, there is the micro and the macro. Macro speak here in New York City is that people who are undocumented, people who are afraid of authorities, people who are, you know, on parole, people who, there's so many reasons why calling the police or going to a shelter is not going to work for people. And so if you want that, I'm not here to tell you that that's wrong. I think sometimes we put everything in the binary. If you're going to do restorative justice, it's because you think that the regular services are bad. And I'm really just like, I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to say, what can we build for people who want what we have to offer? Because right now they are being ignored and they're not being given, you know, what they need. And if we could listen to what they say they want, let's just build it for them. Like not everything is the same for everybody. And not my answers are not good for, you know, many, many people. Like I think one of the beautiful things about restorative justice is we bring people together to really listen to difference. Again, people are different. They have all kinds of different things going on. They have different circumstances. And we have to respect those differences. They have different approaches. They have different lived experience that tells them that this is safe and this is unsafe. And so I just try to bring that into the movement of gender-based violence, is be like, you listen to your wisdom and I want to hear it. And also this is what I have to offer. And these are the people who are asking for this. And you cannot, there is no reason to be pitting them against each other. That's the patriarchy to me, is how we pit different survivors of different you know, patriarchal norms against each other as if it's a zero-sum game. And so I'm really just trying to not play the zero-sum game. And it has benefited. But there was this moment, I'll just say one more thing. There was a moment where we said, okay, we can't keep asking for permission. I asked my mom for permission. I got it. But like, you know, we can't keep asking for permission. There's the moment where we say we're doing this thing. But we never want to force it on anybody. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna give the last question for the night to Gail here, who's raised his hand.
Gail, my favorite. I'm so happy. Gail.
Give him a sec. He's finding the unmute button.
I hope he finds the video button too.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant, Erika. I have so many questions. Just one though that maybe there's time for is that only this morning I had a conversation with a state-funded practitioner who's really feeling under pressure to take a referral for all the wrong reasons that you presented. And I wonder, do you see that happening around you in New York with prosecutors unloading some cases onto people and saying, well, if Erika won't take this, we'll hand it off somewhere else? And how might we regulate those relations out there? You have thoughts about that?
So many thoughts about that. Number one, really having a good community of practitioners who call each other and say, did you get this insane referral? And say, yeah, what did you tell them? I told them to go, you know what? And, oh, me too. Great, great, great. And then you start to feel like, okay, there is like, you know, you can see the theory of change here. So really having trust amongst the people who are doing this work is very important so that you can do that. I just went through this where I've gone through this multiple times where I've received referrals that other people have rejected, or people have received referrals that I've rejected. So the strength of the RJ community is going to be incredibly important in blocking that kind of cherry picking thing. But I would suggest to this person who you spoke to, I mean, I say no a lot. And that's something that you know, I'm mindful of when I think about the roles that prosecutors have, which is that they can't say no. And I do understand that I'm in a different position because I can say, you have to hold that. I'm not taking that. You have to hold that bag. You have to deal with it. I'm not dealing with it. I will take a case that I know I can do good for. I recently had a referral that had gone to somebody else and they were like, still, you know, this is the problem sometimes when you bring this to people and say, this is going to work, they say, okay, you said it was going to work, now you do it. And they won't give it up because you've given them an answer. or a victim or a person who's caused harm feels like they've heard about this restorative justice work and they want it, and the legal authority. I mean, it brings up a lot of questions. You know, what if we win? I was saying to Jacob when we were talking about this presentation, there's a question of what if we win? What does it look like? Really, really large? Are people just demanding this kind of space all the time, and then you say no, and then they get mad? You know, there's a lot to think about with human psychology and stuff. But I will say I recently got a referral. It was for a hate crime around a very volatile political situation that you can imagine for yourselves. And I said, okay, tell me about the facts. And they described the facts. And in the facts, the prosecutor basically said, well, you know, over time, I've been reviewing the footage, and it doesn't look like the defendant in the case caused any harm. They were actually defending themselves against the victim, right? Like, this is where labels really trip us up. So I was like, well, then, you know, you don't have a case. Like, why are you, you know, why would you bring this case to me? And they said, well, you know, these people really need a conversation. And I was like, you know, there are 8 million New Yorkers. Each of those New Yorkers has about 20 really meaningful conversations they should have if they want to grow as a person. And that's up to them. I'm only taking cases and really good conversations if it means that people are going to move forward after an identifiable real harm. And if you're telling me that there's no real harm, your job, I hate to say it, is to drop this case. That's your job, and you need to kind of not lob that on to me. And so I say that a lot to people, and I really try to do it. I hope I sound nicer than I do right now, because right now I'm like, it's a really difficult conversation, but that is the conversation I try to have. And I really encourage people to have really strong firewalls, really understand the referral system, really understand what makes a good case, and don't take it if it's going to net widen, or if it's going to put any of the participants in any kind of harm's way, either because they have to admit to something they didn't do, or they're afraid of the other person, or there could be retaliation. Like, there's so much harm. I think we have to really think about doing no more harm in that kind of situation. So I would encourage them to be really strong with whoever is referring this case, and really clear.
Great. Well, we are, Sue has said something that Sue has a question that she just threw in the chat here. Just quickly, Erika, if you could weigh in on this. Do you
certainly not? Certainly,
okay,
I mean, Sujatha's here. We'd love to hear what Sujatha has to say about this. I would say certainly not bring people all the time together. If it's right. I took a case all the way to the finish line. We were about to come together. The victim calls me, says, I actually just got what I needed. I don't need this. I feel like I finally put this behind me. I said, great, let's not do it then, right? Like, really, this is what I mean about ongoing consent. I did another GBV case. You asked me to be quick, but I can't. I did another GBV case where the day before we were coming together, I called the defendant. It was a system referred case, but there was no quid pro quo. So the system it was like we were doing this entirely on a voluntary basis. So the day before we met, I called the person who'd caused the harm. I said, you have to understand the risk you are taking. If you don't want to do this, let's pull the plug. I am ready to pull the plug at any time if it's not what people need. He said, no, I am ready, let's go. And so we did it, right? But it's like, certainly not. And I also want to say, in GBV cases, I think Zoom can be really helpful. I think you can think about not bringing people together in person. Maybe the first one can be online, and a second one, you think about what's needed. And also, sometimes people don't need to come together in person. And the process of preparation, of connecting via your facilitator around a harm, is enough kind of reality testing for people that they can actually put things away and to move forward in a good way, which is the goal. The goal is not the meeting. The goal is to move forward in a good way. Was it quick?
I mean, I think that's a perfect way to actually close, is it not? So I just want to, I just wanted to say thank you to Erika. I actually had the pleasure of hearing this presentation, or most of it, twice, because I got a little preview yesterday, and I can assure you all that I actually learned more even on the second run through. It's been such a pleasure to work with Erika on this, and I just wanted to say thank you, and thank you all for joining us and for the thoughtful contributions. As we go into the night, enjoy your evenings. Thank you so much.
And because Jacob won't tell you, we have another seminar coming up. When is that, Jacob?
It is on June 26th.
And you know why Jacob knows it's June 26th is because Jacob will be presenting on his work related to a restorative approach in sport, which he's been carrying out in connection with the lab and sharing and contributing as part of this really incredible group. So now all of you who don't have the chance to meet on a regular basis with all of these fellows and associates will know why I count myself so lucky for the vibrant, rich community that they're forming together, and that means that they're sharing not only their work with each other, but now. So please also join us for the next seminar series on the 26th. Thank you, Erika.